The 50-minute rundown. All right, so this is the 50-minute rundown, back with our guest, Matt, who is going to talk to us a little bit about different languages and also different experiences abroad. Matt, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, I'm Matt Miller. I'm currently a fifth year at the University of Cincinnati studying chemical engineering, and Stephen and Nick invited me here because I had a co-op in Japan for 5 months. So I studied Japanese and worked at a Japanese company. So I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah, I went to Japan too for 5 months, so I'm pretty excited about this topic.
Also, I should just say from my perspective, I went to Spain for 3 months. I also went to Nicaragua 2 weeks before that as well. So I've been really intensely studying the Espanol and trying to figure out how verbs are conjugated and all that jazz. Why don't we begin with you, Matt? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your time in Japan and what you went there with some expectations, but maybe were there some things that you just didn't expect, and when you went there, you're like, wow, this is amazing.
The first thing that comes to my head, I think, is the food, because I don't want to say all Americans, but I feel like a lot of Americans, when they think of Japanese food, all they think about is sushi, and
right.
Which Japanese people do eat a lot of fish, but I didn't really have any concept of, I don't know if this is true for you, but I didn't really have any concept of a Japanese food. So,
same, yeah. Exactly.
So I think the thing that was unexpected the most, and one of the things that I loved the most, was the food, and it's actually one of the things I missed the most also about Japan. But
yeah, you want to tell us a little bit more about it, like what dishes they served?
You could probably help me out with this, but
yeah.
My favorite is curry, definitely, and I had Indian curry before going there, but I didn't really realize that there was a difference. But I liked it so much that I went and had curry at least once a week. And
wow,
you recall, the first time I wanted to go there every day after school. The first time we were in Japan,
it's an addiction.
It definitely, yeah, and it never died at all.
And the time away between trips in Japan made it all the more sweeter on return.
Yes.
Like sweeter? Okay, I get it. But anyways, great. So, food. Steve, what about you? Was there an aspect?
Just one thing on sushi. That's one of the most popular images of Japan, but actually they rarely eat it. I think it's more like it's more of like a high class thing or on special occasions. So you'll go, like the cafeterias never had sushi, and it wasn't the most convenient thing to buy.
The second time I was there was for 5 months, and I think I only had sushi twice the entire time. But admittedly, they did know that I wasn't terribly fond of sushi, so that probably had something to do with it. But at the same time, like when we all went out together, it didn't happen that many times.
Okay.
So it's not that popular or that common to eat.
One food that I really enjoyed was takoyaki,
yes,
which I call octopus balls, but essentially it's pieces of octopus inside dough, and you can also put whatever types of flavoring you want to put in there. And I actually went over to one of my coworkers' houses, and he had like this special tray, and you actually cook it right in front of yourself, and you just take like a toothpick and swirl it around. It takes 5 minutes to cook. So delicious.
I would just think though that it's so expensive. No, it's not.
Overall, living conditions in Japan are kind of expensive. 70% of Japan is steep slopes, and so they don't have a lot of great natural resources, especially for food. So they have to import like a lot of their fruits and vegetables.
Right. Yeah.
And so eating in Japan is just kind of a guarantee that it's going to be more expensive. That being said, they have a lot of different exotic things you can get there that, for me, were like well worth the cost to buy.
But takoyaki isn't very much more expensive than anything else.
Yeah.
But it is really good. And one of my favorite foods is katsudon, and it's basically first like a bowl of rice, and then it has breaded either chicken or pork, and it's like not the typical kind of breaded that you usually think. It's like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's delicious, and it has like an egg cooked on top of it, and then I don't know. It's like it's seriously, it has like onions in it, and it's just the best.
Did your company have a convenience store, a cafeteria you went to every day?
They had a cafeteria in the basement, but I never went to it because I got they paid for my lunch, so I got like a bento box every day,
Gotcha.
like a lunchbox sort of thing, but it's not really a lunchbox. It's like I think they like got a lot of them from somewhere else, and every day it was like shipped to the company or like our location, and then everyone got the same. Like, and it was
kind of like army rations. I'm just kidding.
to an extent, I suppose, but like maybe more elegant than that.
Yeah.
Right? But
yeah, I hope so.
It's like basically a box with separated portions, and then another box of rice. So you'd have like rice, and then like probably a meat or fish or like some other type of meat, and then maybe like a few different kinds of vegetables, and like maybe once in a rare while some fruit.
Oh, because fruit is the hardest.
Fruit and vegetables are more expensive.
Yeah.
Important. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and you can get bento boxes for like $500 at like a market somewhere. Or
Not
something.
$500.
Sorry, that would be really expensive. 500 yen. And so
what's the conversion on that, real quick?
1,000 yen is about $13, or at least that's my.
So the 500 yen is maybe like $6 or $7.
Okay, got it. All right.
How much of your food did you get from like convenience stores? Because in Japan, they don't really have large stores like Walmart or Kroger. They just have so many small, tiny stores located all over that have
specific items.
Yeah.
In the area that I lived, it was near Kawasaki, so still relatively close to Tokyo. So it was not really a country area, but there was still, like you're saying, shops for, like a specific shop for like produce or, but I usually didn't go to those places because, like I said, the company paid for my food, and I ate dinner at the cafeteria in my dorm.
Oh, wow.
But,
okay.
I usually went to convenience stores when I bought anything, and the convenience stores are wildly different, because they have actual, or not, I don't know how to describe it, because it's not like a convenience store like we think here. It's more like a gas station type of thing, but with good food. Like the sandwiches the sandwiches are actually really good, and like anything you can buy there is really good. And
I pretty much went to a convenience store every day. There was one right near my station, and so I'd usually buy something, then finish my dinner on my 10-minute walk to my apartment building. Because I was so hungry after the day.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, for me it was a little bit different. I mean, in Spain there's the supermercado, which is just basically a supermarket, but there is kind of like this, there is what they call a corte inglés, which is kind of like the Walmart kind of starting to move in to Spain.
Wow.
Yeah. At the same time, though, it's very expensive to shop there, and you kind of want to go on these like branched convenience stores that you guys were mentioning. Though you always are like questioning the quality of the food. Like you don't know if this is a good store or like if this store is a little shaky, or you're not quite sure. And I was based in Madrid, so it's a little bit different in every city. But for example, in like Salamanca, which is like a more quieter, not as populous city, you could, be a little bit more trustworthy with where you went and where you shopped.
Yeah.
But there's no like Corte Inglés. There's no like huge supermarket that dominates, the playing field there. So it's kind of like what you guys were saying. Though I don't think Japan necessarily imports a lot of fruits and vegetables. Rather, they actually grow a lot of fruits and vegetables there. And there's some controversy about them growing too many vegetables, and to keep the cost up, they would actually dispose of some of them. So like you would decrease your supplies to increase the price. There is some controversy about that. I'm not quite sure what they're exactly doing. I don't know if you guys know this, but Spain is in a terrible economic situation right now. So there's a lot of controversy going back and forth about which way the economy should go and what direction it'll be in. So,
how instrumental was your host family in knowing safe places to eat or different things they taught you?
What was really nice about my host family is that they would feed me all my meals. So, I mean, I'm just kind of like letting them use their judgment to kind of get my food. But basically, I would say at the same time, what was so amazing for me about the host family was I learned just so much Spanish so quickly. Because I kind of had to. I was kind of forced in a situation where I couldn't communicate with any of them unless I knew the Spanish word for it. So I think I quickly learned like what bed sheets were in Spanish, or like what a pillow was, or just even toothbrush, like very basic things very quickly.
Yeah.
You had a lot of Spanish coming into that, right? So that was really like an exponential effect once you got there.
Yeah, what exactly is, like, why were you in
So
Spain?
I studied Spanish in high school, though I wasn't the most intense Spanish learning experience. And then then after that I kind of didn't think much about Spanish. I didn't think I was going to really use it that much. But then my friend and I decided to go to Nicaragua for 2 weeks, and that really piqued my interest to learn Spanish. And so afterwards, I was like, okay, I gotta figure out some study abroad trip because I really want to learn this language. And ultimately, because I want to become a doctor, I wanted to be able to be an interpreter as well, so I could speak to the Hispanic population here.
Okay.
So then I said, all right, well, I gotta go to Spain. I mean, where else are you gonna learn Spanish? So I go to Spain, and I think what really helped me learn Spanish was the fact that I had learned the very basics. I had a foundation of different basic verbs like to have or to go or I am and to be, things like that allowed me to communicate basic sentences and at least maintain some sort of conversation with people. And that just really ramped up my experience learning there. I don't know if you guys had similar.
Yeah, on that note, Matt and I both went to the same intensive language training in Tokyo, Japan. It was 7 weeks, but classes were only 3 hours a day, and the teachers primarily tried to use Japanese. So for me, I stepped off the plane barely being able to pronounce Ohayou gozaimasu, good morning. And so it was really rough because most of the writing on the board they would do would be in Japanese.
Oh my gosh.
And so I had trouble reading and hearing, and so without some other Americans in the class, I would have been completely lost. But I think because I had no preparation going into it, I just thought I could step into this experience. There was a lot of time I spent in Japan that wasn't as useful to me if I had just learned the alphabet or some of the characters. It would have been a lot easier.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much my number one recommendation to anybody going abroad is just learn the alphabet.
Yeah, I would say too, at least for me, I was also in a very super intensive class. I was there 6 hours a day or something at the school, and it was so weird because I'm used to this engineering academia platform where if you know about equations or chemical compounds, you're all that. But when you get over there, I felt like I was an idiot. I couldn't do anything. You're kind of judged by how good your Spanish is because that's how everyone talks there. That's how you communicate with anybody.
Right.
So if your Spanish is not that good, you just kind of seem like you're this mute guy that can't say much and just stands there.
One of the things that I've noticed is since living there, I am so much more empathetic to people living in the United States that that have learned English as a second language.
Totally.
And
totally.
I get frustrated when other people are frustrated with the Latin American population if they're struggling with something or not quite understanding something, and people get frustrated really quickly and don't understand that learning a language is hard. And I don't know, I've noticed that about myself, that I can definitely empathize with them, and I'm 100 times more patient than I ever would have been before.
Yeah, and it's the thing is that what I realized there is that your brain, when you use English as your primary language or Spanish as your first language, and that's all you do for the first 15 years of your life, your brain is so structured around that language. When you hear people just talking on the street, you can just instantly subconsciously know what they said. You can access what they said seconds later after they've said it. But if they speak Spanish, in my Spanish classes, I have to pay attention to every word that professor mutters because I can't do that. I don't have the RAM to go back and pick up exactly what they said. And it's just amazing. That to me is just unbelievably the fact that we are just so attuned to pick out certain sounds and certain words and subconsciously just register them without any effort at all. To me, it's just amazing. Yeah.
How was the experience of learning German versus learning Japanese?
They were very different situations because I took German all throughout high school, and we had a very good German program. So it was more of a... It was really good, but it was more of a classroom type thing. So it was kind of like any other subject where like I had, okay, this is what I'm doing today, this is my homework, this is something I have to do. Like, whereas when I was learning Japanese, it was, if I don't learn this, then I can't do a certain thing in my life. So like, there was that big difference there.
So motivation.
So, and the other thing was that if I didn't do so well at the school in Japan, it didn't really matter that much because it was basically pass-fail, and it didn't like really matter or reflect on me at all. Whereas like with German, I had to have good grades. So like there's definitely a difference in motivation. But also, on another note, Japanese is a lot more different. Like a lot in comparison to English, it's a lot more different than German is. Like German's a lot more similar to English than Japanese is. So that was it's a lot harder to learn Japanese than it is to learn German.
Right. Yeah. My one absolute number one strategy for speaking Spanish was like to avoid the very simple words. Like, for example, like if you had to get the word like to know or to like some sort of like information, like data or something like that, in Spanish, like the simple word is like really weird. It doesn't sound like data at all. And instead I would use like a bigger word that would sound so similar to the English word. So I'd use like información for information.
Okay.
And I would use, so basically I would sound so incredibly smart because I would use like all these really long words that sounded just like the English word. They're called cognates.
Yeah.
And but I wouldn't know like the simple words. So like I could say like a really nerdy sentence and get by, and people would be like, wow, that's like a really weird way of saying that. Why didn't he just say like he needed to get some like data for that instead of like information, you know? And so what happened was like now I just like fall back to like all these really, really long, big words that are just so similar to English. And sometimes I'm like, can't you just understand me? Because it just sounds so you know, like if you're an English speaker, you could probably understand what I'm saying in Spanish because it sounds so similar, you know? So, I mean, for your experience learning German, how was that in comparison to like Japanese? You said it was easier to learn those words.
I think both languages, both German and Japanese, have the same type of thing that you're saying that Spanish does. Like, I don't know if like if borrowed words are a different thing than you were talking about, but like, so German does definitely have a lot of those. So it's sometimes easy to remember those words too, but.
Yeah, an interesting thing I found out was that 17% of the Japanese language, spoken language, is actually derived from English or Western languages. So they have a lot of words that are very similar. Yeah. Some of them are tricky though, like mansion in Japan means apartment. So going back to my mansion means something completely different.
Oh, but we would think it's like mansion?
Right.
Okay,
right.
Yeah, okay.
That actually reminds me, the word arbeito, it's from German, but it means a slightly different thing. Like in Japanese, I think they use it to mean like a part-time job, but in German, Arbeit is like any type of work, or like you have to do something, a job or something, like that can be Arbeit, or like your job or anything. So like it's a tighter, I guess, like a more specific meaning in Japanese, but I think that's interesting. Like, not only can I recognize words from English and Japanese, I can also see like from German words I know.
Right.
Yeah. There's one in like English and Spanish, like called it's called discusión, which means like discuss. Now I thought that meant discussion, so it actually means heated argument. So, so I would always be like, yeah, we had a discusión the other day with my friend, and it was just amazing. It was just so intense.
Yeah, one really cool thing I think about the Japanese language is its written aspect to it, because I don't think most people understand what kanji is or know much about it, but Japan actually has 3 different written languages, you could call them. One's kanji, so it's actually directly influenced from China, and over the years they've taken on Chinese and Japanese pronunciation. And then there's kana, which from my understanding back in the day only the elite males were able to use kanji, and so the females started like deriving their own characters and created like this whole vast realm of literature, and that turned into kana. And there's two types of kana, hiragana and katakana, and I think they both have like 46 characters. And katakana is used for newer words, so like words derived from English or just words that didn't exist, like computer or anything like that. So it's kind of cool when you're looking or reading Japanese, you can tell what new words are. And so when you see something in katakana, you can, even if you like don't know that many Japanese words, if you can sound out katakana, you'd be like, okay, I actually know that word. And just another comment on kanji. Kanji is difficult because a lot of people try to rote memorize it, but there's this book called Remember the Kanji. I don't know if you've heard of this, but what essentially it does is it looks at all the primitives within a kanji, and a kanji is actually telling a story. There's all these different elements of it that have like a specific idea attached to it. Mm-hmm. And so if you learn those ideas, then as you're going through and associating a word with each kanji, you can create a story based around those primitives. So for example, the Japanese word for sad, the kanji contains primitives for jail cell and heart.
Really?
So it's kind of cool. Wow. Anxiety is like fire and head. Angry is guy and heart. Guy is woman and crotch. So just some just some interesting things in that. And he actually goes through and it makes it a lot easier to remember like 1,000 kanji with all these stories. There was talk after World War II to convert, to kind of ditch the kanji and adopt more of a language writing system that's more convenient to interface with Western languages. And I think Korea was able to do this, but the problem with Japanese is that so many of the words sound similar that if you get rid of the kanji, then it becomes a lot harder to know which word you're talking about. And so it's actually kind of a clue when you're reading Japanese. There's all these words that have the same sound, but the kanji is different, and so that's how you know.
Yeah. So when you say kanji, sorry, you mean how the word is actually written is different, right? Like the symbols.
There's a different symbol for the different meanings. So
yeah,
I can't think of an example right off my hand.
So like when you had for sad, for example,
right?
Would it be like jail cell? That symbol for jail cell, and then the
jail cell and heart, like that's just the way you memorize it. Like the primitives take on slightly different forms depending on where they are in the kanji.
So you would have a jail cell symbol and then a heart symbol,
right? And
then they're kind of like mixed together or something, or changed a little bit differently. But that would be sad,
right?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and the tricky thing is too, because it has Japanese pronunciation and Chinese pronunciation. Based on how the kanji are linked together, they can like flip. And so some kanji actually have 3 different pronunciations for it. And so you just have to kind of learn that from experience.
Wow.
And, it sounds a lot more overwhelming than it is when you start learning, because if you are learning kanji and also learning like spoken Japanese, it's a lot easier to remember the different readings of the kanji, because like, oh, I know that word, or like I've heard that word before, so I know those 2 kanji together mean that. And so then you know the different readings for those. So
right.
It's not as overwhelming as it seems, even though it is still difficult.
Yeah, you can really break it down. One more cool note on that is that by learning the kanji and the associated keyword in English, even if I didn't know like the Japanese word associated with it, I could walk around Kyoto and see like these signs and kind of guess what they're saying just based on my understanding of a couple of the kanji. Even though I have no idea what the Japanese says, I can kind of guess the idea behind it.
Wow, so that is amazing.
Yeah.
That is so cool. I mean, luckily for me, like in Spanish, it's such a phonetic language. There's literally only one way a word can be pronounced. And if they want to be pronounced a different way, they just put an accent mark on it. So you cannot go wrong unless there's, some low IQ level going on. So it's very phonetic, very easy to pronounce. It's much easier to guess what the word will sound like than it actually is in English. Like can't, for example, I mean, you could be like can't, or like there's so many different ways you could see it for the first time and then say it in a different way. So, but in Spanish, that rarely happens.
Right.
So, I don't know how German is.
In that regard, both German and Japanese are very, very much the same way. Like, if I don't know how to explain this to people that don't know, but like the kana is always going to make the same sounds no matter what. But and also in German, if you see a word, you're going to know how it sounds, or you can produce that sound. But like what you said, English is not that way at all. There's so many different random reasons or lack of reasons, maybe even for why a word is pronounced the way it is.
Yeah. Japanese is actually, its pronunciation is strikingly similar to Spanish, so it's actually a big advantage that I had some Spanish background learning.
Wow. I've heard that too, and it sounds really weird because I don't really know anything about Spanish, but...
Alright, well I know what my next language is.
But actually, one of my Japanese friends has said the same thing, like sometimes, which I think is bizarre. She said sometimes when she hears people speaking Spanish, if she's not really paying attention, sometimes she thinks, oh, it's Japanese, but like then when she listens, like obviously it's not, but there's still that.
So are there a lot of words in Spanish that sound very similar to those words in Japanese?
It's just like the way you pronounce vowels, like it's easily transferred. So when you see Romanji, which is essentially the Japanese pronunciation with the English letters, it's completely consistent. It doesn't change at all.
Oh, okay, I get it now. So the Spanish words don't necessarily sound the same as like a Japanese word. Like the word for like discussion in Spanish and discussion in Japanese may sound completely different.
Right.
But the way you see the words and you pronounce them is the same between both languages. Okay.
Yeah.
I found a better way to say what I was trying to say. The vowel sounds in Japanese are always the same. There's not any, I guess, disconnect or anything. That's very consistent. So unlike English, where the vowels can make whatever sound they want, pretty much.
Right.
I think that's one of the beautiful things about Japanese is that it's so consistent. The grammar is actually really consistent compared to English. There's very few irregular words, and so the hardest part about Japanese, I think, is you have to be willing to deal with the language, the written language, because once you get into it, the grammar is really straightforward.
Wow.
So.
You know, while we were talking, one thing I thought about too is how I mentioned how I took the more extravagant, nerdy route with words. Another example I thought of was the goal for your goal is meta in Spanish, but for me that sounded nothing like goal at all. So I used objetivo, like my objective. So I'd always be like, yes, my objective is to learn Spanish. And so
I just
my goal,
remembered something. This really doesn't have to do with anything, and it's probably not even a useful thing to know, but in German, I heard on a show once someone say manometer, and it has two meanings. One is manometer, and the other is like man oh man. And that's what he meant by oh man, not this again. But I just think that it's funny that it's spelled exactly the same way it is in English, and so that was really weird for me. But
yeah, there's a lot of words in Spanish that literally look the same in English, but they're just pronounced differently, and they can either mean the same thing or mean nothing like what it means.
German has a lot of that too.
Yeah, I've always I saw a couple signs at the airport, and they would be in German, and I was they had 3 E's in a row. And they did.
That's because
pronounce that.
It's what it is that German, a lot of their words are you can combine words and are combine two different nouns or something and make another noun, and so it's actually two separate words put together, sort of. So one of them probably ends with 2 E's and one of them starts with
another E.
And the one word I know is Imbissstube, and I think it's sort of like a snack stand or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but it's Imbiss and then Stube, so it has 3 S's in a row.
Gosh, okay.
Yeah, one cool thing about the Japanese language is that the only part of a sentence you need for it to be a full sentence is a verb. So it's a lot more contextual when you're talking to somebody. They don't always mention the subject, and so you have to be a little intuitive about what's going on.
So wait, now, in Spanish, you always conjugate the verb with respect to the subject that you're talking about.
Right.
So, for example, he said, you would just say dijo, which is the verb to say, conjugated to he said. but you don't include the he.
Right.
Like, it would be just like me saying said.
Okay.
But it's he.
That's really interesting.
That said that. But now, I don't like this, but in Spanish, he and she is the same thing as the formal you. So there's two ways of saying you, like you as like a friend, or you as like, hey, you're my boss. And the you that's formal, we call that the formal you, is the same as he and she. So like,
are they conjugated? Are the
they're
verbs conjugated
exactly the same. Yeah. So what ends up happening is you like saying like, yeah, and you said that I was gonna go, but he could understand that as he said that I was gonna go, and it just gets very confusing.
Huh.
Yeah.
German kind of has the same thing with the formal. The formal you is the same thing as they.
Yeah.
And it's actually the same as she, but she is the verbs are conjugated differently for she than they are for the formal you and they. But the formal you and they are both conjugated exactly the same way. But you normally know by context if you're talking like
right. Yeah.
Another cool thing about the Japanese conjugation, it's all based on like what level of respect you want to be showing. So, based on their conjugation, if they're saying something rude to you, they meant to be rude. There's like no question. They went out of their way to conjugate the verb to be rude.
Yeah.
And so the conjugation actually like serves a purpose. Whereas I'm not saying it doesn't serve a purpose, but when I was taking Spanish, I didn't understand why you'd conjugate something into male or female when you're dealing with an object that didn't have a sex to it.
Yeah, it's so annoying. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, in Spanish, every object is either feminine or masculine, and you have to memorize every single object. Now, there are general rules, but there are, of course, there's like irregularities, and it just can be a pain, especially when you have to guess if a table is feminine or masculine.
Wait, it only has masculine and feminine?
Yes.
German has masculine, feminine, and neutral.
Whoa.
Well, there is a neutral form in Spanish as well, but that's more for like ideas.
Okay, I don't know the exact number, but they're like roughly equal numbers of all of them. Like something could easily be any of the three.
Okay, well I'll stop complaining.
German's ahead of the times, I guess.
Yeah.
Like bread is feminine, or bread is neutral, and like pants is singular, which is weird, but also feminine.
Got it.
Or like tennis racket is masculine, or like
yeah. So like similarly, like for the word bag, you can say like el bolso. So like the masculine and the feminine version of them mean different types of bags. So like there's like the feminine version, which I believe means like purse. Like an actual purse.
That's really interesting. That's really cool.
But like a bag in the masculine means like your grocery bag.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So, but Steve, I wanted to ask you. You said like there are different ways of different levels of respect in Japanese. How many levels are there, and how many do you have to memorize?
Well, yeah. I think there's 3 primary levels. There's the formal level. There's the really honorific level, and then there's lower rude level. Is that your understanding, or is it
but it's not only rude, it's also like the casual type. So like if like we're just talking right now, then we'd use the lower one. But if you're talking like to someone maybe you don't know, or like maybe your boss or something, you would use like the regular or the like
regular
formal.
level.
But and then like if you're talking to like a super boss or like the head of something, or you want to be super polite, then you'd use like
the highest one
called kegel. Or I forget, but
yeah. Okay, so basically, my question is though is like I can imagine, especially in the workplace, it could be an insult, or you would be very unsure between those top 2 levels for different bosses, right?
I never personally got to that level of Japanese. I was at a research center, but everyone was really good at English there, or like most of the people. Like,
okay.
So as a functional level, I was researching statistical models, and a lot of those terms are in English anyway.
Yeah.
So it just kind of made sense to communicate in English instead of me trying to translate everything into Japanese.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I didn't really have to deal with all those issues. But.
Yeah. I mean, for me, actually, so I've been really studying medical Spanish, and I'm just so lucky because all the drugs are literally like the same in Spanish. You just added like an A and an O to the end. And a lot of the medical terminology we use for like cells or like, you know, cytoplasm, just everything, and that's, as long as it's big enough, it'll sound like Spanish.
That reminds me of an interesting thing that I heard, which is that for me specifically, it's useful. I think one of the other students that went with us, Will, actually told me that a lot of the hospital-like terms are actually in Japanese are actually derived from the German words. So I would know them, which is like, which is weird for me. Like, because I know German, I'm okay at a hospital, like in Japan.
Wow.
But,
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably not like I wouldn't be fluent in the situation,
Right.
but
Right.
It's just an interesting thing that.
Yeah, I wonder how that
told me.
happened.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah, we got about maybe 13, 12 minutes left, just kind of summarize certain thoughts. I don't know if you want to talk maybe a little bit more about actual experience in Japan.
I'm thinking we might want to do another podcast because we're talking about language. For
We just talked about language mostly and not really.
Yeah.
On language, did you find any tools or activities outside of a formal class that really helped you learning?
Oh, okay. That's something I wanted to talk about earlier. On the topic of the difference between when I learned German and when I learned Japanese, again, most of my German was in a classroom setting, but most of my Japanese learning was in a spoken setting. So I was learning by doing, which I think was way more beneficial and helped me learn way faster because I got over the fear of sounding stupid because I know I'm going to get things wrong, but I can get my general point across, and then either they can respond to me or they can tell me what was wrong, or, you know, and by that then they learn the level of my Japanese so they can like gauge it and help me. And the other thing that helped a lot was I was talking to, like, I would always have tea time like almost every day with a group at my company, and it would be them, and their English was about as good as my Japanese, so it was a really good exchange. So we could help each other. And so just I would try to say whatever I could, and they would generally understand or help me out, and then I would learn from that. And I think, again, that's
nice.
That was probably helped me learn way faster than anything.
I totally agree with you completely. I think it was so ironic for me. Like, I've been used to studying like math equations and like human body, you know, functions, and usually like when I get stressed out for a test, like it's okay. Like I can do relatively all right, even though the night or like afterwards I'm like crashing to make up for the all-nighter. But the thing is that when I got very nervous to speak Spanish, it actually like impeded my ability to speak Spanish very well. And so I had to like train myself to be like, I am gonna sound like an idiot, but who cares? Like that type of attitude, I think, really propelled me.
And being afraid to sound like an idiot really hinders your language learning. And
go ahead, Steve. Yeah,
I think that's a big reason why kids are so good at it too. Not only is their palate still in its developmental stage, so like adults might have trouble getting their mouth or their tongue around certain words, but also they're not afraid to look like an idiot. So that frees them up enormously.
Another really good thing about that is that when you learn through that, you also learn what you need to work on. So if you're in a setting with people, then you can try to say what you're saying, and if there's something that you aren't quite sure about or don't know how, you can ask them for help, but you can also then go back by yourself later and study that. And so I think that's much more useful than like learning from a text, like a structured textbook where, okay, we're going to learn this and this and this. Like, so I'm obviously not any master on learning languages, but I think that for me it was more beneficial to try to say what I was going to say and then realize, like through conversation, realize what I needed to study, and then later go back and like figure out the grammar or, you know, like what I was doing wrong or how I can improve, and then use that next and like keep building on that like over and over. And
one thing too I wanted to add was that for like my strategy of actually understanding, because comprehension seemed to be my weakest area, and what happened initially is I was like thinking like an engineer, where you have to do each step like consecutively. You can't like skip ahead and then go back a few. It just doesn't work. So in Spanish, I always thought, okay, I have to understand every single word in the order that it was said to me. So when someone said like a paragraph's worth for me, I'd be stuck on like some unknown word that sounded so foreign to me on like sentence 1, and I'd be trying to translate every single word, and I quickly realized that instead of just trying to translate every single word, like try to pick out the words that you know and piece it all together into some comprehensive thought. And I found this out later, but that's ironically how computers do it too.
The other thing is that is why we, like, back to your original point, that's why we're so good at English, because we can look at the whole picture instead of each individual word and piece together, like, I was actually talking about this to my friend earlier, that if you ask me to define a word, even in any language, even in English, I don't know if I can give you an exact definition, but I can use it in a sentence and have it fit the definition perfectly, or I can hear it and understand what it means, but I can't tell you exactly the definition, but I know from context what it means.
Right.
And I think it's especially so for, like, if I'm reading or listening to German, and someone, like, I understand what they're saying, and then if someone asks me what did they say, and I can't tell you, but I understand exactly what was said, and I I can't, like, what is that word exactly in English? I'm not sure, but I understand the idea.
Yeah.
You know, and it really makes me think that translating is a really interesting thing, and it's a lot more difficult than just understanding what someone's saying.
It's more of art than science in some respects. Yeah. I was curious if you did any sort of book or text learning, or was it mostly just interacting with people and learning from that?
I would actually do both. I would do look on online websites, and also I had apps on my phone that would teach you different grammar or vocabulary, and I would generally just try to do a little bit of that at a time, as often as I could, and then also interact with people and, like, try to use both together.
Gotcha.
And I think that was very effective for me.
Yeah, I just kept a pocket dictionary with me on the subways, and I would just learn all these, like, cognates, all these words that sounded very similar to the English word, and so I would just use them in class left and right after just looking at a dictionary and flipping through and just being like, okay, that's a worthless word, I'm never going to memorize that. Worthless word again, and then I'd be like, oh, that's a useful word, like, the word for to talk. That, yeah, I could use that in the future. Let me just memorize that real quick, you know?
Yeah, one thing that really helped me with memorization, there's this program called Anki. I don't know if you've known it. It was originally designed with Japanese in mind, but it's expanded so you can memorize anything. It's like flashcards, but it's intelligent flashcards. So when you answer based on your degree of certainty or how easy it was, it determines when the next time it's going to show up in your stack. So if it's really hard, it'll show up the next day. If it's really easy, it might be 15 days.
Oh my gosh.
So it just really cuts down on seeing cards that you know.
Why didn't we think of this earlier? Okay.
And it actually has like a sound component to it, so you can hear how the word's pronounced.
Oh my gosh. Wow, okay.
And there's this other system, just to bring it up really fast, it's called All Japan All the Time. And I think he's actually proposed, okay, you're familiar with that. He's proposed a couple different systems. One of them, though, is not only are you trying to have the language come at you as many ways, you want to spend as much hours absorbing the language as possible, increase your input, but also there's this technique called 10,000 sentences, where you take a sentence and you understand all the grammatical parts of it and the words, and then each sentence you kind of add a new word or you modify it slightly. And so what you do is you put this into a program like Anki and test yourself on that, and so it's a way to
could you really how do you spell Anki real quick, just for everybody?
ANKI. It's a free download. You can get it on your phone too, so it's like really
Okay,
yeah, that sounds just incredibly useful.
Like, yeah.
One of the things I read on All Japanese All the Time was, like, on learning a language, if you're in a situation where you feel uncomfortable and you feel like, oh no, this is a serious situation, I can't use that language, that target language, but that's exactly the situation where you need to use that language because, like, that's the most helpful and that's what's going to get you through it. And if you're quick to just say, oh, I'll just use English or I'll just revert to English, then you're going to keep doing that. And, like, it's better to push and try to figure out in your target language.
Right. One thing I just wanted to say earlier, I was talking about that computer thing just to fully explain the idea, because it kind of helped me understand how I should actually comprehend language. So if you look at like a famous computer program like Watson, this is the program that won Jeopardy. So it read all Wikipedia and all these different texts to win against the best players in Jeopardy. And what it does is it doesn't actually read it line by line. Instead, it kind of pieces words together that are closely associated with each other. So, for example, baseball bat is going to go very commonly with Babe Ruth. Those two sets of words will always appear very close to each other. And so it kind of got the idea by this association technique. And that's actually how humans do it too. They associate common words together to get a common idea. So that I thought was a very interesting metaphor to use to help understand the tactic behind comprehension.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Another idea just from All Japan All the Time is he talked about laddering languages, and I certainly haven't gotten to this point, but it's the idea of when you learn a new language, you want to not all learn it from the same language. So if you're like trying to come up with a word for a table, and you learned all those different languages off of English, your brain doesn't really know which way to go. Whereas if you learn Japanese, and then you learn German from Japanese, then the associations will be different, and your brain it'll be easier on your brain. Actually.
Wow, so if you're going to learn a third language, use your secondary language to learn the third language.
Right.
Holy cow.
So I was
okay.
Yeah, I actually have something about that. One of my Japanese friends was learning German, and she said that it was much easier for her to learn German through English. And I think it's both probably because of what you said, but also because English and German are a lot more similar.
So, right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But I thought that was really interesting. Like the idea of learning a third language in a second language, like through a second language, is really, really cool.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today.
I have one more second. Matt, I was just curious, when you were taking German and Japanese classes simultaneously, how did you manage that?
Okay. That's probably a really long story. Yeah. I'll just say that the gist of it is that a lot of times when I'm thinking to say something German, I'll fill in the blanks with something I know in Japanese, or vice versa, and I won't really realize I'm doing it. And it's just funny, like, actually, especially when I've been drinking, I can like make sentences out of two different foreign languages, and it's really cool for people that also speak those two languages. But for anyone else, it's like
majority of the population.
What is he even saying?
Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, that really is all the time we have today. Matt, thank you so much for coming out and talking with us. We really
thanks a lot.
enjoyed
I had a lot of fun
hearing your different experiences. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Steve and I will be back next week.
Peace.
Yeah. See ya.